Well, I would like to invite CADY board member Bill Ludy up, and Bill is going to have the honors of introducing Lynn Lyons. Lynn has done many programs for us in the past, and she's the perfect follow-up to Andrew. He blew us out of the water, and I guarantee you she will as well. So, thank you, Bill.
You're right, Deb. Andrew did blow us out of the water. I was speaking to him out in the hallway, and I reminded him of that wonderful metaphor that he used about running from the bear. Where are you, Andrew? Right here. Yeah. And I reminded him there's a corollary of this adaptive behavior. If he and I were in the woods together with that bear, all I would have to do is outrun him. Right? Yeah. So thank you for reminding me that. Thanks, Deb. Delighted to be here. Good morning, everyone. As Deb noted, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today. As you know, Lynn Lyons is a psychotherapist, an author, an engaging speaker with a special interest in interrupting the generational patterns of anxiety in families. Lynn has presented nationally to thousands of educators, community providers, mental health professionals, parents, and business professionals with a message of encouragement, hope, and resilience. She received her MSW in 1990 from Boston University School of Social Work. She co-authored with Reed Wilson on Anxious Kids, Anxious Parents, and the companion book for kids, Playing with Anxiety, Casey's Guide for Teens and Kids. And she is also the author of Using Hypnosis with Children, Creating and Delivering Effective Interventions, which describes treatment approaches for children with anxiety, depression, sleep issues, and medical issues. Lynn has a private practice down the road in Concord and has been in practice for 26 years. You may noted that she served as the WMUR social emotional expert, providing key insights and strategies to families during the nightly news during the pandemic. CADY is extremely honored, as we all are, to have Lynn back with us, and we know you'll enjoy her presentation. She has warmth, humor, a keen insights on life, so please join me in welcoming Lynn Lyons to present Supporting Our Children and Teens, What Current Research and Mr. Rogers Have in Common, and Why We Need to Listen. Lynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Hi, everybody. It's nice to be with you. I'm feeling better today. Yesterday, I didn't feel so great about the world. I'm generally an optimistic person. I'm generally pretty positive. Boy, I was not feeling it yesterday. So it's nice to be in front of all you and to have all this connection energy based on what we're facing, it seems, just on a regular basis. I cringe when Bill said, because I'm getting old now, so when Bill says that I got my MSW in 1990, I'm like, please don't do the math, please don't do the math. So I live in Concord. I have a practice there. I was on WMUR a lot, which has its upsides and its downsides. I kept telling people to go outside during the pandemic and take a walk, to the point where my mother, who lives in New London, was like, stop telling me to take a walk. And I said, okay, I think based on your tone, I think maybe you need to take a walk. I think maybe a walk would be a good idea. Yeah. I said at one point, it was like June, and I said, we need to go out and pick blueberries, right? And somebody emailed me, got my email and emailed me and told me I should have my license revoked for giving such ridiculous advice to go out and pick blueberries. And I thought, okay, so this is where we are. But that was only, I mean, most of the time the response was good. My mom always had a comment on my hair or something like that, but we got through that, yeah. So I love Mr. Rogers. I talk about Mr. Rogers a lot. I've just had a good dose of Mr. Rogers because I've been doing some research and thinking about Fred a lot. So I'm going to talk to you about what we need to do and how Mr. Rogers knew this a long time ago. And one of my frustrations that I feel as somebody who has been in this profession, this is my 32nd year in this profession, is that people keep being confused. Why? Well, we've been talking about it for decades. It might be hard to fix this problem, but it's not as complicated as we think when we narrow it down to what we need as human beings. The other thing that delights me these days is that during the pandemic, I couldn't talk a lot about prevention. Because when your house is on fire and the fire department shows up, you don't want to hear them lecture you about making sure you change the batteries in the smoke detector. And so during the pandemic, it was all hands on deck. It felt so emergent, and it was. And I couldn't talk about prevention, which is truly one of my favorite things to talk about. Because in the treatment of anxiety and depression, what we do for prevention is the same thing that I do for treatment. It is a Venn diagram. Prevention and treatment are virtually identical. And so we can't leave it to the professionals to fix these problems. We need to work as communities and parents and families to get ahead of this thing. The reactive nature of our culture is not working. We have to stop being fire extinguishers and start paying attention to the arsonists that are going around lighting the fires. So it warms my heart to be able to be at a place that's focusing on prevention, because it really is one of my favorite things to talk about. All right, so let's talk about this. These are the things that I am going after. And these are the things that I am hearing about all the time. We are in a culture of elimination. We are working on trying to get rid of our clutter so we can buy more clutter, to get rid of our discomfort, to get rid of our feelings. When Andrew's talking about putting up a sign that says, "Don't worry, be happy," one of the things that I talk to parents all about is that when you say to your children, "All I want is for you to be happy," and I often say, "and sad, and nervous, and heartbroken." My younger son graduated from UNH on Saturday, summa cum laude. Oh, sorry. And his girlfriend of 3 years broke up with him the next day. Yeah, so I'm in brushing my teeth, and he comes in, eyes full of tears, and he says, "Can you find me a therapist?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I think I need some help to get through this, because I'm feeling really sad. I'm feeling really depressed." And I said, "As you should, my love. Your heart is broken." This is the language that we have to start using, is to get rid of this idea of elimination, to get rid of this idea that we're going to get rid of everything. We have to teach kids how to step in. We have to focus instead on allowing, on connecting, and on malleability. Because the permanent language right now that kids are being taught in terms of their mental health, that this is who they are, that this diagnosis they have is the part of them that defines them. There are so many other parts, and we need to make sure we're paying attention to the words we use as we're talking about mental health, because a lot of them are not working. A lot of them are backfiring. So let's talk about elimination first. It's not about elimination. It's not about getting rid of. And one of the things that I work very hard on with the clinicians that I train and the families, I still see families, by the way. You know, as mentioned, I still have a private practice. Leave here, go home, see families. And I don't see kids alone. I don't have a kid come into my office and leave the parents out in the waiting room and give all the information I have to an 8-year-old and say, "Look, this is what anxiety is, this is how it works, here's your amygdala, here's your prefrontal cortex, here are the patterns we need to pay attention to," and then say to this little 8-year-old, "Okay, little buddy, I know your family has been anxious since 1862, okay? But you, sir, are going to go back into that house and turn this ship around. Go," right? That makes no sense to me. Parents need information. They need to be included. They need to be involved. They need to be taught, and it needs to be done directly and compassionately and empathically. Because the biggest complaint that I get from parents after they've gone to get help and therapy, whatever, I say, well, here you are seeing me. What do you want from me? And they say, just tell me what to do. I just need the words. I don't know how to have these conversations. I wasn't raised in a family that talked about sex or drugs or relationships or sadness or depression or anxiety. I wasn't raised in that family. So when we talk about elimination, one of the things that we want to pay attention to is that it is about allowing. It's about making a lot of room for all the things you're going to feel. It's about looking at step 1 versus step 2. If I had to pick one slide, if somebody said to me, Lynn, there's a new rule and you can only show one slide for the rest of your career, this would be the slide that I would show. Because we're going to have thoughts and feelings and sensations. A lot of them aren't even consciously mediated. They're just there. We're not going to get rid of them. But the goal is to teach kids and to teach adults, how do we recognize them, how do we understand them, and how do we respond to them. When Andrew was talking, I was just sitting back there at table 21 by myself, just nodding my head. Because he was talking about how we allow. He was talking about not getting rid of things, about how do we let these things bubble up, and how do we help kids recognize them. Emotional literacy is the ability to put words to your feelings and to express that to other people. And kids with higher levels of emotional literacy have better mental health outcomes. If you're not familiar with the work of Mark Brackett, who wrote a book called Permission to Feel, he's really been talking about this in amazing ways. Mark Brackett. All right, so step 2, how do you learn to respond and react differently? How do you learn how to regulate? How do you learn how to own your stuff? How do you learn how to take responsibility? How do you learn to recognize what are the signs that are happening that maybe you're getting yourself into trouble? How do we teach kids skills? When I am in front of a family, when I'm getting to know a family, what I am thinking all the time in my head, I'm thinking, okay, what are the resources I'm going to use? Does this family have humor? Is there a sense of warmth? Are they stubborn? Because I can use stubbornness. What are the resources I'm going to use? And what do they not know how to do? And how do I teach it? I'm very concrete in my work. What are the skills that you need in order to manage what life is going to throw at you, and in order to manage what you are going to create inside of you based on what life throws at you? So let's listen to Mr. Rogers for a minute. And remember, he was saying this stuff. If you guys are my age, anybody my age, right? We started watching Mr. Rogers. He started on TV in 1968, I think. You already know how old I am because y'all did the math from 1990. Well, maybe actually, okay. I was born in 1965. I'll just tell you. I'm not ashamed of that. So I was 3 when Mr. Rogers showed up. Mr. Rogers, he didn't raise me, but man, I spent a lot of time listening to him. Spent a lot of time absorbing his message. So let's just listen to a few of his words.
You know, everyone has lots of ways of feeling. And all those ways of feeling are fine. It's what we do with our feelings that matter in this life. I trust that you're growing in ways that will help you with whatever feelings you may have when you're a child and when you're a grown-up.
1970, he said that. 1970. So, in the anxiety biz, anxiety has a few very clear demands. Anxiety wants certainty, and it wants comfort. Anxiety wants to know exactly what's going to happen, And anxiety wants to feel comfortable as you're doing it. And the message we want to give kids, the attitudinal shift that we want to soak them in, that we want to marinate them in, is that it is okay as you're stepping forward to not know exactly what's going to happen. It doesn't mean that we don't plan. It doesn't mean that we get rid of expectations or boundaries or rules or all of that. But as you step into a new phase of your life, it is okay for you to feel nervous. You are supposed to feel nervous. You are supposed to feel unsure. The two words that I couldn't live without in my profession are the two words, of course. Of course you're going to feel anxious when you have to stand up in front of people. That's not what makes me anxious, but I'm medically squeamish. I could never do your job. I pass out. Only about broken bones, though. I've really narrowed it down. 3 times in the last 23 years. But how do we step in? How do we make room for kids to feel uncertain? How do we work to make sure that they're not under the belief that they're supposed to feel competent before they even get there? Because that's when they start to self-medicate. That's when they start to work to get rid of those feelings. If I am dealing with social anxiety, I remember hearing a very well-known person in my field, I know her, and she was talking about social anxiety, and she said one of the things we want to do in therapy is to make sure that the person feels calm and confident as they're stepping into a new social situation. And I was like, no! What do you mean calm and confident before you step into a situation? Do you know how kids learn to feel calm and confident before they step into a social situation? They drink, because alcohol is incredibly socially disinhibiting. They discover that. I will not go on a rant about the mommy wine culture. If you want to hear me go on a rant about the mommy culture, you can listen to the Flusterclux episode we did a few weeks ago about that. This idea that we should drink to be able to manage raising our kids, to manage dealing with our jobs, to manage stepping into situations. The more we use the language of elimination, the more we are setting kids up to discover how well substances do that in the short term. And boy, have they discovered it. Fred also said this: if in public television we can make clear that feelings are mentionable and manageable, that we can speak about this, that we can talk about this. My sister-in-law, Robin, who's married to my brother, she talks about this pretty frequently on the podcast. She does it with me. Her best friend died by suicide in the beginning of their sophomore year in high school. And it was a small private school. They had all been together in school for up to 10 years. And no one ever spoke of it. She was gone. Everybody knew, but there was no discussion about it. She carries that with her now. She recognizes it now. She didn't recognize it when she was a 15-year-old girl. Jane Fonda, actually, if you've heard that story. Jane Fonda's mother also died by suicide. Her mother disappeared, and no one ever talked to her about the fact that her mother was gone. Henry Fonda, doing the best he can. Watch on Golden Pond now and watch those scenes between the two of them, because there was a lot going on. Being able to talk about things, to give language to things, to not pathologize what our normal human experience is so important if we want to build emotional resilience and management in our kids. So what are the elimination traps that we find ourselves in? Well, here's the one I talked about, certainty. Not knowing what's going to happen and seeing I have to eliminate uncertainty. I have to know everything. This is huge in my work because I'm always looking to pay attention to, are we offering all of this reassurance? And I hear people say all the time, well, she's nervous about this, so we have to make sure she knows exactly what's going to happen. You're doing the disorder, another one of my favorite phrases. You're working for the anxiety if you're not allowing a child to feel uncertain. Again, it's all within context, right? You're dropping your little preschooler off at preschool, and your little preschooler says, Mommy or Daddy, are you going to pick me up after school today? And we don't say, well, life is uncertain, right? We'll see how it goes, right? Hope for the best. We also want to pay attention to distraction. Distraction is prescribed and taught by the anxiety profession all the time. When I ask kids who are talking to me about what they've learned in their therapy, or what tools they have in their toolbox, what are their coping strategies, I have a strong reaction to the term coping strategies these days, because here's what I'm going to hear. I learned breathing and distraction. It's not enough. Distraction gives the message to our kids that they can't feel something and they need to find a way to get rid of it. These are distraction devices. They're also certainty devices. Remember back in the old days, old people, if you couldn't remember the lyric of a song, you had to live with that uncertainty, didn't you? You just had to tolerate not knowing. God, what is it? What is it? And now at this stage in my life, I'm really good at getting the first letter of things. So I'm like, it's ma. There was a Buffalo Springfield song was on the radio, probably their one hit, right? Yeah, on the radio, and my husband said, who did this song? And I was like, oh, Google. And I was like, ba. And then I said, it's an animal, ba. And he's like, I can't believe you can't get it. You've got the ba and the animal. What are your choices, right? Bulldog, bison, close. When we teach kids distraction, when we say to them, you can't feel this, we're going to give you something. This is the way it shows up clinically. Not a little boy. He wasn't little. He was 17. I was giving a talk at a school a while ago. It was in Chicago, pre-COVID. And I gave my talk, and he came up afterwards. And he said, some of the things you're saying are sort of making me wonder about what I'm learning. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I get really depressed and I get really anxious. And so I have this accommodation written into my plan that when I start having these feelings and these thoughts that I don't like, and he would have these intrusive thoughts, these dark intrusive thoughts, I have permission to put in my earbuds and put my music on as loudly as possible into my brain, because that's the way that I can stop thinking these thoughts. That's not a good long-term plan. But a professional told him to do that, and it was written into his plan for his school. Is it because we're so uncomfortable with it? Is it because we were raised to believe that you shouldn't talk about these things, you shouldn't feel these things? But this is the message they get all the time. Does distraction have its place? Absolutely. When you're stuck on something, when I'm ruminating about something, when I'm pissed off about something, I use exercise. That's the thing that, I want to go for a walk. I want to go for a hike. You'll never find me in a restorative yoga class, right? No, move. I like to move. So sometimes we need to unhook. I use the word unhook, not the word distraction. I want you to unhook. If you have a toddler, by the way, distraction is saving your life. Stick with it. Maybe I talk about unhooking and pivoting. There's that thought. There it is, right? We want to externalize it. Whenever we create space, whenever we can become observers of our own thinking, give us a little room. Now maybe I have to unhook from this and then go about my day. But I'm not going to try and get rid of the anxiety. I'm not. If you have OCD and you're trying to get rid of the thoughts, what you resist persists. That's what we say in the anxiety biz. I can't think this way. I can't think this way. I shouldn't have this thought. Why am I having this thought? What does it mean? I don't care. Why are you having that thought? Because you have a human brain that is incredibly good at coming up with weird stuff. That's why you're having that thought. The word best. When we talk to kids about being their best, we are setting them up. And we say this a lot, as long as you've tried your best. If you are a perfectionist, Andrew and I have a lot in common. If you are a perfectionist and somebody says to you, as long as you know you've done your best, you feel a surge of panic go through you. What does that mean? If you're not a perfectionist, you've got a kid and they did their project for 4th grade and you're looking at it on the table and it's a hot mess. And you go like, all right, well, is that your best? And they're like, yep! Right? Psh, those kids are going to do okay. But when we talk about best, we give kids this message that they have to keep going and going and going until it meets some standard of perfection. And the problem in this country is that we love a perfectionist, don't we? Remember Nadia Coleman? Right? Watch that now, knowing what we know now, right? She was this frail, thin little girl living behind the Iron Curtain with dark circles under her eyes that were astounding. And she became a hero to little girls in this country because she got a 10. How many little girls wanted to be Nadia Coleman? Read Andre Agassi's biography, Open, about the perfectionistic drive of his abusive father. We have to be careful with this word. We say it with the best of intentions. Right? Well, as long as you've done your best. Okay, so what do we say instead? What do we do instead? Well, we help kids differentiate between when do you have to have the pedal to the metal and when is it okay to coast. Because sometimes we really do have to pay attention. Sometimes we really do have to make sure that we've got the numbers correctly, that we are looking at something with the exactitude that it requires. And there are other times when we don't. And helping kids learn the difference between those things gives them permission to recognize that the only way that we can put the pedal to the metal is we've got other places in our lives where we can coast. That's a key differentiation that we want to help kids understand. Elimination means that we have gotten so concerned about our kids getting hurt physically, emotionally, our kids being disappointed. There was a therapist in Concord. I hope she's not here. I don't think so. It's a long time ago. She's probably retired. She was giving kids the diagnosis of disappointment syndrome. I was like, what? Disappointment means you wanted something and you didn't get it, and now you got to figure out how to cope. But when we're saying to kids, don't, right? I talk about safety chatter. Don't. Catastrophic parents, anxious parents talk a lot about safety. And I know safety is a real thing, we want to keep our kids safe. But what happens in a school when we set up a place for kids to go when they're having difficulty and we call it a safe room? What does that imply about all the other places in the school? How about when we say to a kid, I want you to find a safe adult? What does that imply about all the other adults in the school? There's just other terms we can use. A trusted adult. How about a reboot room? How about a reset room? I don't even like the word calm, which surprises people because I'm in the anxiety biz. I need you to calm down. I need you to reboot. I need you to reset. I need you to regulate. I need you to connect. So we have to pay attention to our language. Speaking of jumping, this is my son's best friend, Adam. Just saw him yesterday, actually. He also graduated from college on Saturday. As parents, what we have to learn how to do and what we have to talk to our kids about is how do we assess and take reasonable risk? Because in the anxiety world, right, it's about shutting down risk. It's about making sure that they're never going to be in a situation. A parent said to me, my job is to make sure that she never feels uncomfortable. This was also a guy who had a baby monitor in his daughter's room, and she was 12. So they decided they were going to go skydiving a few summers ago. That, I mean, I'm not an overprotective mom at all, you know, but when your 18-year-old says like, hey mom, I just want to let you know, I'm going to jump out of an airplane tomorrow. I go, oh, that's going to be expensive. That's what I said. Oh, I thought I could appeal to his fiscal responsibility. I go, oh, that's expensive. He goes, yeah, no, it's only $200 and I've got it saved up. I go, okay. He did it, and he felt nauseous and decided he wasn't going to do it again. I was like, oh, well, at least you got to do it once. Best I talked about. So another quote from Mr. Rogers. When we talk about best and we talk about perfectionism, we are not teaching kids how you handle when they screw up. When you've got kids that feel like the standard, the baseline is that they have to do things perfectly, what happens when they do screw up? Well, a few things. One, sometimes they shut down because it's a very all or nothing state of mind. Either I'm perfect or I'm horrible. And then they blame. When you think you're supposed to be the best and you can't pull it off, when it doesn't work, when you can't own those feelings of disappointment, when you can't own the reality of the fact that we're all fallible, that we screw up all the time, then we start to blame. A few months ago, I was in one of my son's cars, and I backed up and hit the other son's car. Just ripped the side view mirror right off. Yeah. I had to go in the house and say, hey, both of you, look what I did to both of your cars. So embarrassing. Not the first time. Not the first time. All right, so let's just watch a little example of what Fred taught us when we were little.
Oh, just remind me. Remember that animal book you got had a mistake in it, right?
Yes, did you see the mistake? I'll show it to you. Let me find it. It was with the giraffe and the skunk. You see, there's a giraffe, but it has the word skunk under it. Mm-hmm. And there's a picture of a skunk, and it has the word giraffe under it.
Right here is the corrected version.
Is that the
there
corrected
you go.
one?
Speedy delivery.
Let's check it.
Alrighty, now. Towards the front.
Right there.
There we go.
Now there's the giraffe with the word giraffe right under it,
mm-hmm.
and the skunk with the word skunk right under it.
The corrected version.
Good.
They,
you know that those printers didn't just erase these and put in the corrected version.
no, they had to make them all over again. They had to print them all over again. It took a lot of work.
Right? The brilliance of that lesson. They had to do it all over again. Somebody screwed up and they had to own it and fix it. That's what he was teaching us when we were little, sitting there. And it's okay. Look at that. Did they make a mistake? No, they did not. Let's talk about the language of permanence a little bit, because this is something that has become increasingly powerful and common because we've made some mistakes in the way that we are talking to kids about their mental health. Mental health awareness is an awesome thing. And the fact that kids can say, I'm feeling this, I need help. The fact that my 21-year-old came to me and said, I need to talk to somebody because my heart is breaking. Rather than stuffing it down, rather than going out and binge drinking with his friends. All of that is fabulous. But we've done something in this that is backfiring. The more we talk about these diagnoses and these issues as permanent, the more our young people are hearing that there is nothing they can do about them. And the research about this is coming in fast and furious. When people are told regarding their depression that their depression is primarily genetic and chemical, those people are more pessimistic about being able to recover, and they are more unlikely to seek help. When, however, people are told that your genetic makeup, Andrew used the word epigenetics, right? That your genetic makeup, that your brain, that your chemicals, that these things are malleable, that healing happens, that this isn't a permanent state, that we can figure out things, that we can teach you once you recover, we can talk about relapse prevention, we can help give you the skills that will help you. Those people are more optimistic about getting help and more likely to seek out help. And in this country currently, the likelihood of somebody who's struggling with a mental illness to go and get help is less than 50%. The average in the country is about 48%. There's the one state that's at the top. What state do you think is at the top in terms of their percentage of people who get help, who seek help and can find help? What state do you think does the best? No, California's terrible. Not New Hampshire. Somebody said it. Vermont. Vermont is the best in the country, and the best is 57%. That's the best. So when we are talking to young people about their mental health, the message that we want to give to them is that they are works in progress, that they are malleable, that they are still learning and growing, that there are skills that they can learn. I will tell you that pretty consistently when I am in front of a group of high school students and I say to them, your depression, your anxiety is not a genetic disorder. Are there genes that contribute? Absolutely. Are there certain temperaments with anxiety that make you more at risk? Absolutely. But the social components of anxiety and depression are powerful. And we need to pay attention to that because there are things that you can do. And then I say to them, if you are struggling with your mood, and as my mentor says, who is at risk for a mood disorder? Anybody who has moods. So if you are struggling with your moods, if you're struggling with anxiety, there are things that you need to learn about your operating system. Because for all of us, there are things that we do that make depression and anxiety worse, and there are things that we do that make depression and anxiety better. So I say that, and then I brace myself, because somebody is going to be pissed. And it just happened 3 weeks ago. And this young woman came up to me, I'm sort of standing there, and I see her come, she's got 2 friends with her. And lots of times kids come up and say thank you, and that was really helpful. She comes up and she says, "You are invalidating." And I said, "Tell me why." And she said, "Because you said this." And I said, "Actually, I didn't say that." "You said this." "Oh, not quite. I actually didn't say that." "You said this." And she basically said, "How dare you tell me that there are things that I can do because these are my 5 diagnoses." And she named them off. And her friend, who was standing next to her, it was funny, one friend just kept saying, "I think we should go to lunch. I think we should go to lunch." And the other friend says, "Every health class I've ever taken in this school has taught me that anxiety and depression are genetic disorders." And I said, "I'd like to see the textbook and I'd like to see the curriculum." Not helpful. It is not about blame. It is not about saying this is your fault. And I think that's where all the mental health awareness really was helpful. But it is about teaching kids the difference between blame and responsibility. Because if you have a diagnosis, that is a great thing because it means that you reached out to somebody and they got you help. And based on the odds of that happening in this country, you beat the odds. But now we need to teach them how it is that the choices they make, or the feelings that they're not dealing with, or the information, that self-awareness, social skills, what do we need to teach kids that is preventative? Rather than to saying to them, sorry, this is how you're wired. I don't say this based on me making this up in my office. They say it to me all the time. Passivity is what keeps depression going. The idea that you can't get better, the idea that nothing is going to change, is what leads to suicide. There is a ton of research on positive expectancy. Positive expectancy, very simply, is the belief that things can change. And when we take that away from kids, by giving them misinformation, we are hurting, not helping. And I feel like that has become more and more prevalent. We want kids to know that they're not done yet. I give kids assignments all the time. If you are in therapy with me as a family, you're doing something during the week, which should not be a surprising thing, because if I'm teaching your kids piano, I want them to practice during the week too. And what I will have kids do if I'm working with a teenager that's feeling particularly, sort of this is who I am and this is my diagnosis and there's nothing that I can do about it, I will say, the assignment I will give them is, I want you to find 3 people in the world that you admire. It might be a sports hero, it might be an artist, it might be a musician, it might be your math teacher. And I want you to find stories of people who were struggling and who have now figured things out. That's the message we want to give kids. This message of passivity and this message of permanence is backfiring big time. And we need to think about the language that we use. This was a study that was done a few years ago. This researcher was trying to figure out how can we make high school less stressful for high school students, which is a pretty big goal, right? How can we deal with the stress that kids are feeling? And so they decided to come up with this very simple and slick intervention, which are my favorite kinds of interventions. And they said that the incoming freshmen were going to have a series of group meetings, not a ton, not a lot, but the message that they were going to get at the beginning of their freshman year is that you are not done yet, that you are changing, that your social relationships are going to change, the way you view things, your skills, your competence is going to change. What they found was that when those kids went through high school, the kids that got that message reported less stress as they went through high school, because when they were feeling something horrible, when they were feeling overwhelmed, when they were feeling sad, the message that they had been given was, this is not who you are. There was a public service campaign, mental health campaign, one of the few that I like, because a lot of them, if I hear somebody say depression is like diabetes one more time, this one said, it gets better. It gets better. That was the message that we gave to kids. So let's visit Fred again.
I was also editor of the yearbook my senior year and president of the student council in my senior year at high school. Very different from my freshman year in high school. I was a very shy kid. I was the Daniel Striped Tiger of that school, I'm sure. But something happened, and you can never truly, completely understand why. But there was this kid who was in our church whose name was Jim Stumbaugh.
So Fred goes on to talk about this kid, Jim Stumbaugh. Jim Stumbaugh was sort of one of the stars of the class. He was smart, he was athletic, he played 3 sports, and he broke his leg, and he was in the hospital. And Mr. Rogers said, so somebody said to him, and he said, I don't know why I was picked. He was in 9th grade. I don't know why but somebody said, Fred, can you bring Jim's homework to him in the hospital? So Fred was, intimidated. Fred was sort of this very shy Daniel striped tiger. He's got to go and deliver homework to the star, but he did it. And they struck up a friendship. And he said, Jim sort of realized that I was more than just this shy kid, and we started having conversations, and we started sharing things about ourselves. And Jim brought him into the social fold because Jim had clout. Jim had social cachet. And in that environment, with this one person who said, come on in, then that's when Fred is talking about, I became editor of the newspaper, I became president of the class. But it was because he made this unlikely connection. That somebody said, hey, join. When we're talking about connection, which I think is probably a theme of what you've heard all morning, we cannot underestimate the importance of connection. During COVID, the thing that young people reported as most difficult for them was loneliness and isolation. Interestingly, at the beginning, teenagers were sort of digging COVID. A lot of my clients, which are high-achieving anxious people, they liked it. I had one girl tell me, I've never been bored before. I heard about this concept called bored. I didn't know what it was because she was so scheduled. 3 things that teenagers said at the beginning of COVID, the beginning, right when we thought it was just going to be a few months. They said, I like hanging out with my family. A lot of them talked about developing relationships with their siblings that they hadn't had because everybody had their scheduled disparate activities that they were participating in. There wasn't a lot of hanging out. They were getting more sleep. And interestingly, they were using social media less at the beginning. Now, as the pandemic went on, loneliness and isolation became prominent. And there was that uncertainty. They didn't know when it was going to end. They started missing things and missing out on things, just as we all experienced. Loneliness and isolation and depression and anxiety were all on the rise prior to the pandemic. The pandemic didn't help. The rates of loneliness in the age group of about 14 to 24 in this country, per self-reports, is 50% higher than the rates reported by the elderly in this country, which is defined as people over the age of 72. The young people in this country are the loneliest and the most isolated, which is interesting, isn't it? Because we don't think about that. The pandemic made it worse. But it was there before the pandemic. And when you talk to kids who suffer from a variety of things, loneliness is what undoes them. And loneliness, as we define it, is not a state of being alone. It's a state of perceiving and experiencing disconnection even when you are with people. Loneliness is a perceived state of disconnection. Because there are many people who enjoy spending time alone. There are many people who can recognize that if you move to a new city or start a new job or start at college, that it's okay, you're going to be separate for a while, you have to make your connections. But those people who feel like they don't know how to connect, they don't have those skills, it shows up in anxiety. Social anxiety is a fear of judgment. And this is where we get a little bit into the elimination stuff, right? Because you've got a kid who's socially anxious. And they say, well, I'm afraid when I go to school that people are going to be looking at me. And we try and reassure them. We say, nobody's judging you. Yes, they are. We are a social species. We are judging all the time. You are judging me. I get judged for a living. You are sitting here thinking things about me. I'm thinking things about you too. I'm looking at you. Social anxiety is we want to say, okay, so we're gonna say, oh, they're not judging you, or oh, you're paying too much attention to yourself, or nobody's paying attention to you. Yes, they are. The skill we want to teach socially anxious kids to help them with their loneliness is not to convince them that people aren't judging, to not convince them that relationships aren't vulnerable and messy and tricky and that they're going to get their hearts broken or people are going to reject them and maybe even they're going to reject people. We don't want to give them that line. We want to teach them the ability to tolerate judgment. The ability to tolerate a normal, common human interaction. Judgment exists. Disappointment, rejection. Not everybody's going to like you. Loneliness is oftentimes based on nobody talking to a child or giving a child social skills. We have done a really good job with that with kids on the spectrum. So 30 years ago, when I was first starting my career, we didn't even use the word autism. I taught in a school that was a outplacement at the Institute of Living in Hartford, Connecticut. They had a little school for kids that were severely emotionally disturbed, we would say, that couldn't be in the public school system. I was the teacher assistant at 21 years old with the littlest kids. So there were 7 of them between the ages of 5 and 8. I look back on that now, every single one of those kids was on the spectrum, and we never used the word autism. So we figured it out, didn't we? And we started recognizing that kids on the spectrum have a really difficult time with social skills, so we started very concretely giving them the do's and don'ts. Telling them, you know, this works, don't do this. If you watch the show Love on the Spectrum, has anybody watched that series, Love on the Spectrum? Right? I mean, it's wonderful. It's heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. But these are young adults who are trying to find love, and they're on the spectrum. And so they have this relationship coach that comes in and tells them, how do you talk to people, how do you date, what works and what doesn't work. But we're not really doing that very well with kids right now. We're not doing it enough with all of them, because social skills are preventative for anxiety and depression and loneliness. When kids feel connected, when they feel like they are a part of something, and you don't have to have a huge group. 1 or 2 friends, they have found in the research, is enough to sustain you. And I can tell you over and over and over again, the way kids end up in my office in crisis are socially anxious kids, and that friend moved away. Or they moved, or they went to 2 separate schools, and they are lost. Connection, connection, connection. What happened, again, prior to the pandemic, but certainly got heightened during the pandemic, is that we began to see more negative connection. Because when you don't have positive things to celebrate, when you're not at school, you know, being involved in your robotics club or hanging out with your buddies that are on the baseball team, you find ways to negatively bond. And one of the things that's happening consistently, and it's still happening even though they're back in school, is that they are bonding over rejecting kids. There is a uptick in, we are going to bond as a group and make that girl or boy the common enemy. Little 7th grader goes into the cafeteria last month and goes to sit down at his table with his buddies, and they say to him, we took a vote and you can't sit with us anymore. And he took his tray and went off, and they bonded over that. Negative connection. This is common. Human beings like to do this. We like to gossip. We like to be man up to man down. These are all common social behaviors. We just need to talk about it very consistently with kids. The other thing that I'm seeing now is one-upping. And one-upping in, I take more medication than you. I get less sleep than you. It's a humble brag now to say, I only got 3 hours of sleep. Adults do it too. Oh, I'm so busy. Oh, I'm even busier. How are you? Oh, exhausted. If you ran into a friend you hadn't seen for a while and you said, how are you? And they were like, you know what, I'm kind of coasting, right? Things are smooth. Not working too hard, taking some time off, using every single one of my goddamn sick days, right? You would go home and you would say to your partner, "Oh my gosh, I ran into Sylvia. I don't know what she's on. I don't know what she's doing." Right? But when you say, "Oh, how are you?" Right? We love it. We love it. Social comparison versus social connection. Let me just say a few words about that. When we look at social media with kids, social comparison theory says that when you compare yourself to somebody else, you generally compare them up and you down. Unless you got a narcissistic personality disorder, but even so, we know that that's just on the surface. Underneath, you're a mess, right? So, social comparison, you compare them up and you down. When we look at social media use, one of the things that they look at with the research with kids is, and adults too, is how do you engage with social media? If you engage passively, so if you are by yourself and you are just looking at stuff and you are doing social comparison, that is very likely to increase anxiety and depression. If you are actively engaged in social media, which means that you're using your social media to raise money, that you're communicating. We have a family text in my family, and yesterday I was with a client, and my phone was off, but I could hear it buzzing over there, and it was just going, bzz, 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 and I knew they were up to something. I knew something was going down, and it was at my expense. I won't even show you. It's too embarrassing. All right, so when we look at social comparison, and if you're talking to kids about social media, because again, you can't say, don't go on social media. It would be great if they could try it. I try and get kids to take a social media holiday. One of the things that happens very often is that a parent will discover that their child is doing something horrible on social media, right? Maybe I had one 13-year-old girl that was sending nudes to a guy that she didn't know in Ohio. So of course, parents rightfully freak out, and they say, you cannot be on your phone for a month. The mom says to me, in 3 days, I had my kid back. 3 days, I had my kid back. If you haven't read the book, Dopamine Nation, you should. It's really, have you read that book? You'll love it. It's talking your language, right? But it talks about the pleasure-pain cycle and dopamine, and it's all about addiction. It's awesome. But she talks about kids needing 4 weeks away from social media in order to reset the screw-up in the pleasure-pain cycle that these devices give us. So here are just some of the critical skills that are so important that I want to talk to kids about. And we need to talk to them about it all the time. How do you set boundaries? How do you know how to not invade somebody else's boundaries? How do you know when somebody is invading your boundaries? How do you know when a relationship is just not going to work? Do we talk to kids about that? Do we talk about friendships that sort of have to go by the wayside? Do we talk about relationships? What are the things that you want to pay attention to in a relationship? What happens, particularly now, because, and if you work with middle schoolers, right, big friendship explosions, a lot of shifting and changing. Do we talk to kids about how you repair a relationship when things go bad? Do we talk to them about how you apologize? Do we talk about owning your own stuff? The ability to say, this is what I did. Critical. If you have a blamer in your life, you know how difficult they are to deal with. Being a chronic blamer is relationship poison. Awkward empathy. So one of the things if you were raised in my generation, right, you probably have heard this. You know what, I just didn't want to bring it up. I didn't want to upset her. Yeah, I heard that her husband got diagnosed with cancer, but, right? Yeah, I heard that her mom died, but, didn't want to bring it up. I say to people all the time, you're not going to remind her that her husband just died by saying, hey, I'm sorry, I heard about your husband. Oh my gosh, I'd forgotten about that. Now you made me feel bad. But that's what we do. Oh, it feels awkward. And what we're paying attention to is our awkwardness. Because if you talk to somebody who's gone through some sort of tragedy, somebody who's grieving, somebody who's struggling, One of the things that they will say is people acknowledging it. How many times have you heard from parents who have lost a child, I want to hear my child's name? Say it. And yet we say, oh, I don't want to upset them. They're already upset. And when we say to kids, I want you to learn how to be empathic, and it's going to feel awkward. Because that's sort of what we judge. You know, oh, it made me feel uncomfortable to bring this up. I didn't know exactly what to say. I say to my kids all the time, I want you to mention it. I want you to say something about it. And you are going to feel uncomfortable. And it's not about you. My mom was really good at teaching me this. You show up, she said. You show up. And you feel uncomfortable. I had a friend whose son was hit by a car and killed. And I said and I had moved. It was when I lived in Pennsylvania. And so I was, I called my mom. I found out. I was just devastated. I was 13 years old, skateboarding. Awful. Awful. Every parent's nightmare. And I called my mom and I said, should I go? She said, yeah. Get on a plane and go. And I said, I won't know what to say. She said, that's not the point. I never regret when I show up. We want to teach kids about self-disclosure, particularly with these devices. Who do you share things with, and who do you not share things with? I talk to young people about thinking that if you have some really important information, I want you to treat it like a little bird. And I want you to give that little bird to somebody who's going to take care of your little bird. Don't share everything about you with everybody. I want them to be discriminating in that way. And emotional literacy, I mentioned, the ability to put words to your feelings. The more nuanced your vocabulary is, the better. The more nuanced your vocabulary is, we know the outcomes are better. So screens, right? 1972, he said this. 1972, Fred said this. He had no idea what was coming. He was talking about TV. Jean Twenge, who's written several books on generational things, she wrote a book called Generation Me. She looks at generational trends. Her last book was called iGen. And she did a research study about screen time. It was published in the article, the research was published in the Atlantic. And this was a line in the article. And boy, did people get mad. Boy, did they get mad. How dare you say, right? Everybody wants to be the exception to the rule. If kids have phones in their bedrooms, their sleep is worse. If adults have phones in their bedrooms, their sleep is worse. And parents will say to me, parents who are so good at setting limits and they wouldn't let their kids do this and this, and then it comes to a smartphone, and it's like they lose their parenting minds. Well, she has to have her phone in her room because it wakes her up in the morning. I go, okay, so I don't know if you know about this, but there's this thing that they invented like 300 years ago called an alarm clock. And it's really cool. You put the time in and you put you press a button on the top, and then at the assigned time, noise or music, and now they even have light. They probably have it probably puts out a scent of chocolate chip cookies at this point. Screens in the bedrooms are not a good idea. Get the phones out of the bedroom. And parents will say, oh, but I've already told her she could. You can tell her she can't. Oh, but she'll be mad. She'll be mad. She'll pout. It's okay. So, this is, Fred said this. Pretty poignant. He had a lot of good things to say, didn't he? So, I don't remember when I was here before, Deb. Did I tell the African violet story?
I think you did, but please repeat it.
Okay.
It's powerful.
It's a good one. If you've heard it before, you can check your Twitter feed now while I'm telling it. No, don't. I'm just kidding. So there was a guy named Milton Erickson. He was a psychiatrist, lived in Arizona. He died in 1981. he was kind of a rogue. He was during the psychiatry era of the 50s because he wasn't Freudian. He was one of the very first solution-focused guys. He spent a lot of his childhood, he had polio as a child, so he spent time in an iron lung, and the only thing he could move was his eyes, so he became an incredible observer of human behavior. And his job was to figure out how he could shift something and change behavior without pathologizing it. So the story goes like this. He was at a medical conference in Ohio or something. And a young resident at the medical conference came up to him and said, "Dr. Erickson, I know you're famous and busy and fancy, but I've got this aunt. And my aunt lives outside of town. She is what they used to call a spinster, right? Never married, had no kids. Her siblings were dying off. She had plenty of resources, lived in a lovely house." He said, "But I'm really concerned about her. She's not engaging in the things she used to do. She doesn't go to church anymore. She's not seeing her friends. I think she's depressed. I'm sort of the person to take care of her, and I don't know what to do. Would you be willing to come to her house and meet her and offer some advice to me?" And Dr. Erickson said, "Sure." So they go to the house. The aunt knows they're coming. And he is asking her different questions and, what does she do? And she says, "Not much. Do you go to church anymore?" "No." "Why bother?" Right? Why bother? When people get to why bother, that's when we want to pay attention. So he noticed that she had a greenhouse, and then on the counters of her house, she had all of these African violets. And if you know about African violets, which I don't, but allegedly, they're very hard to grow. You need to have a green thumb. You have to be skilled. But she was very, very skilled. So he talked to her for a while, and he said, "Okay, so I'm going to tell you to do something, and you have to promise me that you're going to do it." He was known for being able to extract promises from people. He just had this demeanor where he's like, "If you listen to what I will tell you, I will help you." So what he said is, "I know you don't go to church anymore, so you don't have to go to church, but I want you to get the church bulletin. And on that church bulletin, it would list everybody who had been ill, or everybody who had died, or everybody who had something to celebrate, right? The birth of a baby, all the things that a church community would want their parishioners to know. I want you to get that, and your only thing I want you to do is I want you to deliver an African violet to everybody on the list in the church bulletin every week." So she said, "Okay." They leave. The nephew was probably like, "That's it, dude? Like, brilliant psychiatrist, and you want her to just deliver African violets?" And he said, "Oh yeah, it'll work." And he went on his way. 10 years later, Dr. Erickson received an envelope in the mail with a newspaper clipping. It was from the nephew. And the newspaper clipping said, the headline was, "African lady dies, town mourns." She died 10 years later, and there was no room in the church at her funeral. She didn't die depressed. She didn't die lonely. She was connected, an offering of herself. She was creating meaning in her world. You all have something to give. You all have something to share. It's a little bit of a skewed audience, right? Here you are. I'm not standing in front of the I don't even want to say what I'm thinking. I'm not standing in front of them. What's your African violet? What is it that you can share? We know with kids and with adults that when we are engaged in meaningful activity, we do better, because anxiety and depression are internalizing disorders. We go inside and do them. We disconnect. We shut down. How do we teach kids to share of themselves? The question that Fred was asked, I believe this is from the Charlie Rose show. The question that he asked is, how many kids do you think you have helped? Let's just listen to his response.
Special. I don't care how many, even if it's just one. We get so wrapped up in numbers in our society, and the most important thing is that we're able to be one-to-one, you and I, with each other at the moment. If we can be present to the moment with the person that we happen to be with at the moment, that's what's important.
Connection. Right? So we've got all these parents that are on these phones. Many years ago, I was listening to the radio. They were doing a story on NPR. It was so long ago that they were talking about BlackBerries. It was even before smartphones had become. And this woman was telling a story. She was a very successful executive working blah, 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 blah. And she got a stomach bug. So she's on the toilet, you know, bleh, and her 2-year-old went and got her BlackBerry and brought it to her and said, "Feel better, feel better." Being able to recognize, right, these are addictive, these things, right? They give you that thing we're looking for. How do we connect? How many families don't sit down for family dinner? How many families are so busy that the kids are eating in the car on the way from one thing to another, going through the drive-thru? I mean, it's become this badge of honor, like I said, to just be so busy. So as I end today, I want to take a moment. And if you've ever watched the speech that Mr. Rogers gave near the end of his life, I think it was at Dartmouth, actually. And one of the things he did in many of his speeches is he said at the end, I want you to take a moment and I just want you to think about the person that helped you get here. Think about the people that helped you get here. So, as I go through this, I'm going to offer you some silence. And I just want you to think about a few things. I want you to think about what your African violet is. I want you to think about what it is that you offer. And again, skewed sample, because here you all are. I want you to think about the skills that you can teach, that you can bring. But it really just comes down to connection, doesn't it? It really just comes down to connection. So, as you're thinking about that, think about the people in your life, thinking about what you can share. I'll just move through some of my favorite Fred Rogers quotes. I say all the time that this work that I do is hard, but it's not complicated. Because it comes down to such basic things. Anxiety is not complicated. It does the same thing over and over and over again. And I think we need to change this confusion that we keep expressing. This language of confusion. Why? The language of connection. How? How are we going to offer connection to our young people in a time when they need it more than ever? They have always needed it, but they needed it now. They need it now, more than ever. Yeah. So thank you for listening. Thank you.